show is brought to you by Health Plans, your Medicare plans, insurance solutions, and resource agency. We have a variety of plans and products that fit your needs, benefit requirements, and budget, with many low or no-cost premium plans, zero co-pays, and much more. Our licensed benefits advisor's priority is your health and well-being. Call us today and book your no-obligation consultation. 1-929-367-5269.
Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel, iHealth Radio. We're your host, Hurricaneh. New day, new show, new topic. This is our monthly special, and this is our live Q&A with Dr. Heim. Again, this is Climb to Your Prime with Dr. Heim. So this is every Friday, 9 p.m., all the way from Australia. We have world-renowned psychiatrist Dr. Heim answering your questions live, and we do have your questions. So stay tuned. We'll be starting shortly. We're waiting for the doctor to join our discussion. So if you have any questions, as you can see, you have the number on the screen. So please dial in, or you can just comment and send us your questions if you have any based on the topic. Last month, we've discussed a few topics, but one of them that was highlighted was the gender discussion and classification, and Dr. Heim had agreed to join us this time, and maybe we can address it, further. So he is with us right now, so I'm bringing him up to the stream. There he is.
Good morning, Hurricane. Well, good evening to you.
Yeah, listen, we always gonna have that one. Good morning for you. Good evening for us.
That's right.
How you been?
I've been all right. How about you?
I've been doing terrific, just doing my thing. That's it. Busy.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic.
Well, listen, it's always a pleasure having you on, and we are live actually, so just heads up.
Okay. So here I am. People are there. You're there. We're all set to go.
That's it. Well, again, I was just doing the quick introduction. I actually started a little later because last time I started earlier and had music, Facebook put me out. so I have to make sure this time there's no music, so I stayed a little peaceful here. So, but so how you been otherwise? Before we get started, how things in the land down under there?
Oh well, Hurricane, as you know, it's an amazing world. It's a bewildering world. It's a very confusing world that we're all negotiating at the moment. But at the moment, it's not been too bad. It's been flooding where we are, but the sun's actually decided to make an appearance in the last couple of days, and that always lifts my heart. How have things been where you are, Hurricane?
Oh, we've had some nice heat, I have to say. We've had some nice, dry days, not a lot of rain, definitely a lot of heat. We've been hitting 102, 105. I mean, up north, it's pretty, this week, a couple of days were bad. Today was decent. I mean, it was okay. I mean, not too cold, not too hot. I mean, it's still the 80s, so we'll take it. I mean, personally, I love that. So I don't mind the heat.
No, that's lovely. That's where I'd love to be. That's good.
I know. I mean, that's like, I don't want to be where you are right now. I can't do cold. Well, listen, Doctor, thank you. As always, you're always on point with us, and you have committed to this, opportunity here to share value and insights with people. And so far, it's been great. You've answered a lot of questions over the last year almost. Actually, it's been a year.
Have you been doing this a year?
I know.
That's amazing, Hurricane.
It's like, it's quick. I mean, I just realized that. Wow. All right. Well, listen, last month, I know we had a few questions, and one of the things that we've discussed was it was gender classification. We talked about transgender, but it was more like just a general based on the questions we had. And I know you wanted to give us a lot more in-depth discussion in this particular session. Are we still on for that?
Oh, we're still on for that. Yep, yep.
All right, all right. It is a big topic because a lot of people are still not clear about this whole concept, right? It's new. I mean, fairly new, I would say, and there's just too many questions left and right, and the why, the how, who, the driver behind it, and what's the psychiatry, piece about it, or psychology piece about it, saying. And also we can talk about the religious factor, because I mean, obviously that there's a big debate about that in various religions, but then also just in the regular world. I mean, schools, this, that. I mean, now there's all kind of debates about it. And again, this is an open discussion, and just for people, so don't get annoyed, don't get upset. This is not a biased one way or the other. This is just to share and shed the light on this topic, because it is something that we have to live with and deal with today. It's part of society, and we have to understand how to operate within this new regulation that's been implemented, and most of the places now are coming on with the same rules and regulations, and just classification as to who is what and where to go, even the bathroom situation and things like that. So first things first, doctor, it is an open, so the floor is yours. You can start with whichever way you want to go about it. I mean, I guess the base, let's define that maybe, and then we can go from there. So all yours, Doc.
So firstly, thanks very much, Hurricane, for having this on your show. It's actually very brave of you, right? Because it's a hot topic, and a lot of people can find themselves getting offended by some of the things that get said, for or against, or either sides, or good grief. It's a bit strange that we're talking about sides in the first place. How did we get there? Because if we were talking about broken arms or heart attacks or appendicitis, we wouldn't be talking about sides. You still hear me there?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, I hear.
Okay, that's good. But for some reason, this has become a sides. And so I want to explain how we got there. Firstly, whenever we talk about transgender issues, we're actually talking about real people. We're talking about real people, their identities, their feelings. So it's a bit like, Hurricane, having your sex life, your religious life, and all your personal life spoken about in society for everybody's opinion. So that takes a bit of sensitivity in the first place, right? And the second thing is, we're not here just for curiosity. It's not just because these things are just outside of our everyday experience that we're curious and we just want to know. We actually need to have a bit more empathy and compassion than that, because we are talking about people's identity and people's gender and sexual identifications. And all of us are really quite precious about our gender, about our sexual expressions, and our identities, so who we are. So the difference between this and, let's say, a broken arm is that this goes beyond just something of the body. It goes into somebody's identity. And because of that, we need to be quite sensitive. Now, the other question that I wanted to ask is, how did we get to be there being sides? Well, there's a little equation that's called risk equals the hazard plus the outrage. So in other words, because we are now talking about questions like what is normal, what we're allowed to say or not, and because this is beginning to involve our children, we have this moral outrage, sort of like, don't touch our kids. We want to take care of our kids. But then on the other side is, my kid needs some good care, all right? So how do you balance those things? And the thing is that we try to separate all these things out, so it's not an us against them. It's science, medicine, and a way forward for the best outcome for all people. So that's just a bit of background that I wanted to put in there, Hurricane, so that we can have a context, so we can talk about these things in a compassionate way.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I mean, I appreciate it, because again, you said it. It is a, I had to think about, whether it's a good content that we want to share, a resource, or at least information. But I do feel the value, because I mean, my kids, are curious. People's, families are curious, and there's a lot of stuff. It is taboo to a degree in a lot of, realms and a lot of homes.
Yeah.
In some cultures, almost not unheard of. And so there's a lot of things. And we live in the Western world, so it is a mixture of religious faiths and beliefs. Some conservative, some not, and so it is very sensitive. And thank you for breaking that. I mean, yes, it is part of identity, and we can understand that, and we can debate the concept of behind it if you want. I mean, we can just highlight that just to I guess convey that. But the fact is, you're right. I mean, at least we have an opportunity to hear it from your perspective as a psychology master and a psychiatrist. You understand the way we frame things, the way we work as humans, and that could just put us in the context of where we are today. So
okay. And Hurricane, you brought up the different cultures, how these things are culturally informed, and how it religions have something to say about this as well. So I want to make one really big distinction that we do carry in medicine, and that is the difference between sex and gender. And I know there are a lot of people looking to break down that distinction, but scientifically, we still keep that distinction. So the distinction is basically this: sex is the biological expression of a male having an XY chromosome and females having XX chromosomes, whereas gender is the culturally informed societal expression. Some people like to say it's a social construct. So it is how sex gets expressed in a certain society as far as gender is concerned. Now, that distinction that I just made, that comes from the World Health Organization. So it's nothing that I'm making up. It's something that is recognized that this is the way things are at the moment, and that's the best way for us to move forward in society. Now, on top of that, there's one other thing, and this is gender identity. So that each individual, each person can see if they actually identify with the gender that is socially constructed. All right, so we're getting a bit complex here. We're talking about the science, the biology of male and female, which is in every one of our cells of our body. Then we get to gender, which is how that is expressed in society and the different roles that we take on as far as masculine or feminine or anything in between is concerned. And then we get to gender identity, which has to do with each individual. How much of a male do you feel like? How much of a female do you feel like? And that has to do with identity. And so that goes into the subjective realm, whereas sex is very objective.
Thank you, Doctor, for at least breaking down, the scientific, version of it, because to your point, I mean, I would say personally, and I'm sure people watching and listening right now, we've always kind of put those together, right? Sex and gender was one. So male is male, female is female. To your point, chromosomes XY is male, XX is female. And there are scientifically cases where there were XYY and X, double X. So there are some exception to that, biologically. But you're right. That's been the tradition, or at least the understanding. And I don't know if a lot of people probably watching right now, this is the first time they're going to see that there's a distinction between sex and gender in clear. I mean, as a definition. And that's actually a first step, at least to understanding where, this is going and how it is being, presented in the world right now.
Yes. And that's an important distinction to make, because one of the definitions of science, the word science just means knowledge, but it is knowledge that we can all agree on. Like you will notice that one of the purest sciences we have, in a sense, is mathematics, because there aren't debates out there on social media about whether 15 and 3 equals 18. You won't get those sort of debates. You will get these debates because we're moving away from what we know as factual science towards gender expressions and gender identity. And when it comes to your identity, Hurricane, and my identity, all of a sudden we're in a subjective world, because this is the strange thing about how we all perceive life. Our brains actually construct a subjective view of what we all hope is objective reality. And that's why some of the opinions in this area become so passionate, because we're no longer arguing on what objective reality is. We're already moving into this area of subjectivity, because all of our identities are subjective, and yet there is room in this wonderful wide world for all of our identities.
Thank you, Doc. So let's break that down. I mean, I think some of the things that I can think of and some questions, and I know I have a few questions that, I think,
Good. Yep.
but before we get to the questions, one of the things that I was just wondering about is that centuries, right, have passed. Mankind has been around, and this is a today kind of concept, right?
Yes.
It's not something that we've seen or heard in history. I mean, we've heard about other things in history, but not when someone is identifying themselves differently from what their sex, is, and so therefore, culturally, ethically, religiously, society-wise, that's always been. Identities were always there. I mean, people always identify as who they were, through religion, through other things, even through political stuff. But this is the first time that this debate is happening, and it's becoming part of the reality of things, right? So okay. Why this didn't happen before, or at least we don't know of it historically, or maybe there is. I'm not sure.
Okay. So I'll refine all of that just for a moment at the hurricane. So it's not that there weren't these expressions, right? In fact, the science of the situation is that there has always been people who have been uncomfortable with the male-female binary system, right? But there's a number of things that have happened in the last 100 years that have meant we can now listen to that more because we now have choice. In our society in particular, we actually have the medical technology to facilitate somebody transitioning from male to female or female to male. And that's only been around not even 100 years. So anybody in a society before that, if they felt that they didn't identify with the social constructs, there was nothing they could do about it, right? Because we didn't have the technology. Whereas now we have the technology. And that's actually an important ingredient as to this debate. One of the reasons that we're debating this so much is because we have the technology, and we now have the technology to do it on a much larger scale. And that is one of the things that people are objecting to. Why all of a sudden do we have all these people that want to transition? Hurricane, as far as I know, the first transgender surgery was done in Berlin in 1930. And this was somebody who was in a male body who believed themselves to be female and really wanted to express themselves as a female. And so they lived as a female before the surgery and lived for a while as a female after the surgery. Unfortunately, they died of complications from the surgery. And you see, we live in an age where we don't have these complications to the extent that we did, but we still have risk, which is why we don't want to do surgery on everybody, all right? We want to select the people who will benefit by it, and we don't want to select the people who will not be served well by it, which is why we still need to trust a medical establishment to make those decisions that, okay, if you feel that you do not identify with the sex that you were born, or as people say, assigned at birth, then let's go through a period where we talk about that. We see if transitioning is the right thing to you. And so for you. So one of the big debates at the moment is, should we be transitioning a whole lot of people, or should we put the brakes on and say, hold it, this is all too much? And that's where people's beliefs start to inform and shade the medical science.
Okay. I mean, that's interesting, but I didn't think about it from that angle, that there is, I mean, obviously the surgeries and things that are in place right now are somewhat sophisticated, and you thank you for sharing, the history, like at least the first case, that's dating back almost a century ago. Right. But the science is there. You're right. I mean, any surgery can be difficult and can be, life-threatening. I mean, anybody that goes under the knife and anesthesia, there's a good chance there's always a waiver that you have to sign, whether you're going to make it or not. But in this case, some people would probably not want to go through the experience, even if they might have identified differently. Some people would just want to test it out and just be like, you know what, I want to be who I feel I am, and that's what it is. but then let's talk about, you talked about subjectivity, right? And now there are a little over 7 billion people on this planet right now, and this is a very, very small percentage of at least that we know of, right? Globally. So that's, I think that's where the main challenge is. Science is here. There is I guess, a challenge of identity for some folks, and they feel that this is how they feel about it, and then now that they have the science to support it, they're willing to take the next step. But then it's still not acceptable across the globe the way, I guess.
That's true. That's right.
So most people may think, and again, this is where I think your expertise is very important, is that the average person will say, well, there's something wrong with this person, right? And I know I'm not claiming that there's something wrong, but people can state that. These are statements that are very out there, that, why would someone want to change nature or how they literally, were created, especially when talk to religion, it's a whole different world, right? And so how do we address that? I mean, I think that's the biggest question that I think on the table here, because the majority of people still are not, I guess, comfortable with this subject, and again, thus and hence the idea that this is a very sensitive topic.
Yes.
And really, a lot of folks would probably point the finger and say, well, that is your choice. You don't feel like, this is how you're supposed to, but now it's becoming a burden, let's say, or it's becoming a law, and now I have to be subjected to it. So it becomes a very difficult task. And I know this is a tough question, but from the psychological, aspect of it, how do we, kind of clear that for the masses, if you want?
Okay. So there's a lot in what you just said there, Hurricane, and so I've got to just pull it apart little by little. Okay.
Please.
First of all, I need to explain the amazing influence that the internet has had on all of our lives. All right, and the amazing influence that it's had on science and the way that we think and the way that we're able to express ourselves. Because before the internet, science, and I'll stick to medical science, thought that it had all the answers. All right, and I'm going to use one example that, in a sense, changed my life. So, medical science knew that people who were Negroid could not have red hair, right? That the red hair gene was something in Caucasians only and not in Negro people. But since the internet, I came across this one quote by somebody who was Negro that had red hair that said, I wish science would stop saying that I do not exist. Right? Now, when you're faced with something like that, the science has to change. The science is not always right. And the relevance of that is that through the internet and through social media, we become much more aware of the exceptional cases rather than the norm. Okay, and this is just straight science. Okay, if I, as a scientist, say that a Negroid person cannot have red hair, right, and then somebody with red hair comes up to me and says, I'm one of those people that can't exist, then the science has to change, right? So we are in this area when it comes to gender identity, where it's not enough to say that the majority of people feel very comfortable with their gender and their sex, their biological sex. Therefore, there's something wrong with you, right? Because that's actually what we're saying. And this is why it becomes political, because this is what was the prevailing idea during the age of colonization, that we people have all the right answers and you minority people have to listen to us. Okay, and we're now turning that all around, and I'm hoping that we're going to end up with a more equality-based world where there is more room for everybody. So in this area where there's more room for everybody, it means that there is more room for people to say, you know what, I don't quite feel at peace with my assigned gender role, right? So we're able to listen to that more. And again, coming back to medicine, if that involves suffering, then the essence of what I do is to alleviate suffering. And so since the 1930s, when that first gender reassignment surgery or gender affirming surgery was done, we have had developments in not only surgery, but also endocrinology, which is hormones. So we're able now to give people hormones to facilitate their feelings so that they do not suffer. And that has developed to such an extent now, to the point where it is so available that we're able to do this for a whole lot of people. But the ethical question becomes, where do we draw the line? Where do we say that this person should have treatment, this person should not have treatment? And getting back to your question, the challenge for cultures and for religious institutions is to make room, to broaden, to be a bit more open. And to do that, we need to come down to our humanity. We are all human beings. We're all trying to get through this together. One life experience is as good as another life experience, and we want to be able to help each other. And ideally, medical science does that.
So thank you, doctor. Well, so since in the same realm, the concept, like you mentioned, religion, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of alluded to it earlier. So again, talking about 7+ billion people, the majority of those folks have one of the main, I guess, denominations or religious beliefs, and a lot of those come with divine, I guess, scriptures.
Yes.
And those scriptures have specific rules, and some of them are very clear, even about the gender and I guess the sex and sexuality and all that stuff, right? So
Yes.
so how, I mean, and people, faith is very how can I say, restrictive in a way, and also it's the rules are the rules, and people are very attached to it, and when they can turn to be extreme as well. And
Yes.
so even if you have some more of flexible folks within that religious realm, the majority can still be on the extreme side when it comes to opinion. I mean, we have debates about abortion, we have debates about many other subjects, drugs, I mean, in beheading, for example, or an eye for an eye decisions, like in some of the religious and I guess rulings. But in this case here, there is a debate about it, because in the religious aspect, so whether you take Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, which is the largest, in depending what group, I mean, some folks are very extreme about it and it's not acceptable, some folks not. So I know we're not going to change that, and obviously during this discussion here, we have no capabilities to really have any input to it. But from its psychology, now we have the decrees or divine rulings, right?
Yes.
And people apply those for society, and I still believe faith is important, right? I mean, you have to have, without faith we have no, we'll have social decline, right?
Yes.
And so we have all those things, but that's where it gets a little dicey. It's a little difficult, because now
Okay, all right, good. All right, now I just want to say, Hurricane, that in a way you're asking me to answer one of the biggest questions in all of humanity at the moment. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No. I don't mind, Hurricane, because there is a way forward. There's a framework of thinking about this. So you're asking, how can we reconcile a religious point of view and a scientific point of view? All right. And this is actually really important, because all of us have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, the framework that I want to put forward is that religion and science are not at odds with each other. Firstly, they pertain to different worlds altogether. Science, by definition, has nothing to say outside this world, outside what we can see and measure. That's what science is actually on about, okay? As soon as a scientist even says, I am an atheist, that already is a statement of belief. That's not a statement of science. Because, as you know, there are plenty of scientists that are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheists, agnostic, whatever. They cover two different realms. When we're talking about religion, and the word religion means religate, a binding back to God. So first of all religions assume that God exists, and so that our world is in this context of a greater context with God. So religion is a way of understanding the world outside of this world. Okay? Now, I know that the two have to coexist in each of our lives, and depending on each of our religious viewpoints, including atheism, we have a point of view about that. But this is why I stick to science, Hurricane, because science is the knowledge about what we can all agree on, right?
Fair.
And I talked about mathematics, you know, how we can all agree on that. We can all agree that the sun rises in the east, okay? Here, when it comes to gender dysphoria, we're in an area where not everybody agrees. And indeed, there is ambiguity in the science, and that's one of the problems with this particular area. The scientists do not have it worked out. And yet, this looks as though it threatens each person's worldview. And each religion that you mentioned is a particular worldview. But the framework that I want to put out to people there is that it doesn't. Because science and a religious worldview actually talk about two separate things, okay? And that's the framework that I've encouraged people to have, because that way we can stay in dialogue about the science while respecting each other's religious and cultural values.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I know you. Yeah, we're probably going to hear this for years to come, and eventually
right.
it's going to get to that point. But again, it is still a challenging question, and I know it's. But I love the way you did it. You separate them, and you kind of like look at them from that angle. It's a lot easier, and then everybody is going to deal with it on their own way based on their level of faith and the level of science. And by the way, to your point, I mean, science and religion can coexist. I mean, they've coexisted, and a lot of religious beliefs do have science embedded in them. So again, maybe someone would disagree.
But, no, not at all. Hurricane, in the department that I'm working in at the moment, there must be 5 or 6 different religious worldviews. What keeps us together is the science of psychiatry. And that's where we are there. We are there to serve people who have needs in this particular area. And that's what binds us together.
Thank you. So Doctor, now let's deep dive. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about the society and just the objectivity, subjectivity of this and the opinionated stuff. But now let's talk about the roots of this. I mean, someone wakes up, they don't just immediately think that they're different. Or is that even a case? Is that possible? Because people say like, well, sometimes, does someone start from birth, or like the minute they start realizing who they were as kids, they'll say, well, I don't see myself as a boy or a girl, or is it something that materializes over time?
Okay. That's a really good question, Hurricane. And to answer that, I'm going to go to one of the pioneers in sexology and in transgender issues. And his name is Harry Benjamin. And Harry Benjamin put out a book that basically paved the way for our understanding of transgender issues in the 1960s. And he was not a psychiatrist. He was a doctor. He was actually an endocrinologist, so a hormone doctor. And he served these people, firstly in Europe, but then in the USA, that he saw, which were mainly, as he saw, women trapped inside a male body. That's the way he formulated it. And he spoke to a lot of these people for a long time and then helped them find a way forward. So he, in a way, put together the people who would put together the hormones, or put together the psychiatric assessment, and then put together the surgeons that could help these people achieve the kind of life that they needed to achieve. And look, he was a hero, Hurricane, because he worked firstly in New York, but then in San Francisco in the Tenderloin district, where a lot of down and out people were, and he was there to help them. And he helped a lot of people, and he kept in touch with them personally up until the day he died. So he had a vested interest in helping people. Now, here's a dilemma. What he saw is that, yes, people would, from a young age, feel that they were trapped inside the wrong body. And that's the concept that they used at the time. So by the time he got to speak to them in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they had been feeling like this for a long, long time. And he could see that they were suffering for a long, long time. Now, I've actually got to talk about the role of psychiatry in this, because in Harry Benjamin's day, The only role for a psychiatrist was to make sure that there wasn't any psychiatric illness here, that this was a purely medical problem, because having being transgender or wanting to transition is not a psychiatric problem. And that's something that I have to emphasize right now, okay? That people who are transgender, that people who want to transition, that in itself is not a psychiatric problem, right? So early on, psychiatrists used to make sure that there was no psychiatric problem there, and then say to the surgeons, yep, this person's going to do fine, this will be great. Now, however, and I'm winding forward about 80 years, we have this diagnosis called gender dysphoria. And that is a psychiatric problem. It's not wanting to transition. It's not the transitioning itself. It's the dysphoria or the depression or the suicidality or the difficult feelings that can come because of that situation. So I've got to say that some people who transition don't have dysphoria at all, but a lot of people do. And that's where psychiatry comes in. Does that clear things up, Hurricane?
Well, yeah, to a degree. I mean, no, I thank you. I mean, it's clear. You said it. This is not psychiatry, caused by psychiatrists or psychiatry problem. It is more physical or just pure biological, right?
Yes.
But people will still question, like, well, why would someone want to change themselves? That you said, the person is trapped in a different body. They think that, I am male physically, but I don't think that, or I am female and I think I'm more of a guy, right?
That's right.
And so now that most people will probably qualify that as there's something in the mind, right, or psychologically wrong. So you're stating that from a psychiatrist, point of view, that is not the case. It is not coming from the mind. What comes from the mind is really, to your point, suicidal thoughts and maybe other things, maybe depression and some other stuff.
Yes.
And so one has nothing to do with the other. So that's clear. Thank you for that. So in essence, someone that is young at early age can start identifying, or at least behaving, differently, or being attracted to the opposite, let's say gender. Right, or sex, for that matter, for biological reasons. So I'm trying to get closer to the definitions here.
So we'll go through a few definitions, right? Because early on, the way that doctors saw people who are transitioning was on a continuum from people who had same-sex attraction. Okay, so that was early on. Now we've progressed in that, and we see the expression of sexuality, be it heterosexual or homosexual or something else, as distinct from somebody who wants to transition, right? It's going to get complex, Hurricane, so hang on, all right?
I'm all right.
So a male may want to transition to become a heterosexual female, but a male may want to transition to become a homosexual female. And same with a female may want to transition to become a homosexual male or to become a heterosexual male. Now, that gets very complex. But the take-home message right here is that sexuality and gender expression are separate, okay? So we can't, and this is another thing that happens because of social media. We would all like to have nice little boxes that we can sort of have, oh, that's the answer, that's the answer. And already by talking to me, you're realizing that it's actually going to become more and more complex. And we haven't got to the controversial stuff yet, Hurricane, right? When we get there, it's going to get very complex, okay?
Yes, sir.
And I've got to say, this is a bit of the disadvantage of social media and the internet, because things that are very complex, all of a sudden, we as a general public, we want to understand. And we are actually talking about things that the scientists themselves do not yet understand. And yet we have a public that says, we want to understand this, package it for us so that we can understand. Not only that, so that our opinion counts. And see, when the first person had surgery to undergo transition, There was so much that we didn't understand, and there's still so much that we don't understand. So try to package that to people so that they understand becomes very, very difficult, Hurricane.
Well, thank you, Doc. And you're right. I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, social media and the internet is global, right? And people have different opinions, and you have the scientific folks that actually are still debating, but you have people that may not have any knowledge, but because of opinion or something, an article they read, they might just share information that may be valid or not valid, and therefore it gets kind of almost misconstrued, over and basically, you know how it is, it just goes viral, and that becomes the actual science because of one conceived notion, right? And so that can be a problem, and we've seen that in COVID, we've seen that in a lot of other, whether it's war, it doesn't matter, it gets out of context, and then everybody takes it based on their own, and by the time it gets to the 1 million folks, it's a whole different concept in its own. So doctor, I want to just go back to, so we've established this is not a psychiatric problem for the folks that actually have.
Well, yep. But psychiatry is very heavily involved. Okay. So let's put it that way. Yeah.
No, I get it, but we're talking that I was referring to the folks that actually have a transgender, I guess identification, right, or gender classification or identification realm. They want to change or they feel otherwise. But now let's talk about the reverse, impact on the psychology of the non-folks, the folks that are not seeing eye to eye, because that's the majority, right? So that's a bigger issue right now. Yes,
it is. That's a very good way of looking at it. Yep. What would you like to? Where should we go about that?
So how do we? Is there? I mean, what's the impact that we that you are seeing in the field from folks that may not see eye to eye with this ideology?
Okay.
And is there a reaction to it that is maybe creating suicidal thought, maybe criminal thoughts and other things?
Yes. Okay. That's an excellent question, Hurricane, because now we get into why this is such a debate at the moment. Okay. Because the science is moving in this. I talked about the first surgery. I talked about when hormones got brought in, and then when we talked about it being firstly gender identity disorder, and now we have what's called gender dysphoria. And that's what we talk about at the moment. And scientifically, I'm keeping apart being transgender and having mental health problems because the two are separate. Now, the science of all of that is governed by what's called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And this is the peak body that puts out guidelines as to how doctors should work with people with transgender issues. And I've got to say that their guidelines were in the 8th book of standards of care, are very reasonable, right? But, okay, so let's say one of their things that they say is that transitioning surgery should not be offered to people under the age of 17, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is people out in the public hear that and they go, I can't believe that they're going to do surgery like that to children. Mm-hmm. We can't do things like that because we get affronted with the ethics of a situation that has to do with a small amount of people, right, and their needs, and their very specialized needs. And scientists have dedicated their lives to trying to understand these people's needs, and they still don't. So we as members of the public are not going to get there. And yet, somebody else will say, what? 17? What if you've got gender dysphoria or you want to transition before that? If you're 13, do you have to wait till you're 17? That's ridiculous. And so this world peak body has actually gotten flack from both sides of the conservative view and the progressive view for whatever they put out, right? So I want to bring this down to an element of trust. That because we live in an age where our trust is being eroded in people like peak bodies or scientists, we feel that we have to know ourselves. Whereas the way that we set up society is pretty damn good, actually. We try to get the best people into the right positions to work on the science so that we can move forward in the right way for everybody. And so, in a sense, we need to trust the World Professional Association of Transgender Health to be able to move forward with the available science for the good of all humanity, quite frankly. And that's what it's trying to do. But you and I sometimes have to use the answer, I don't know all the things that are going on in this area, because that's the reality of the situation.
It is. I mean, well, again, I mean, we're trying to just highlight some of it, at least answer some of the questions to the degree that we understand and to the degree that the science has, cleared right now. So that leads us to the next question. Someone in a family, a member of a family, is identifying one way or the other, right? Or thinking about a change, or just feeling that this is them. This is how they identify. Now, what is that impact on that family, and how can they possibly deal with that? I mean, I'm sure some may be supportive, some may not be supportive, some may be shocked. I mean, we've seen that just not in the transgender case. We've seen it in just homosexuality, for example. Someone is coming out and stating that I prefer to be with the same type of sex, and then it becomes a whole big deal in the family. And then we're not even talking about the religious concept here or stuff. Just the immediate environment and the impact. How what would you say to the people? I mean, just listen right now, one way or the other, whether for or against, but how to handle it.
Okay, so Hurricane, this is another excellent question, okay, which brings up some really hard issues, right? But I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about love, and I'm going to talk about identity, right? Because you said if somebody comes out or says that they want to transition, or that their identity, it's like homosexuality having to come out, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. For the rest of the family, do not withdraw your love, right? Love is what each of us human beings need, no matter what identity we have, because somebody who has just declared that they identify as a different gender, they've put themselves out on the line there to be accepted or rejected. And this is life-threatening, right? And so for people who are firstly affronted by that, to sort of say, look, I don't understand what's going on, but I just want to let you know that I'm going to love you, and I'm going to go on this journey with you because you're really important to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. The love is important, and that's got to continue no matter what happens. However, as you said, this is difficult. This is not just about one person. This is about the whole family's identity, right? So firstly, it's got to do with the identity, let's say, of the parents. The parents think, oh, have we done something wrong, right? They haven't, but because it's an affront to their identity, because they thought, we never thought that we would have somebody who is homosexual or who identifies with a different gender in our family, right? And that's got to do with their identity. So what I want to say is, for all parents, brothers and sisters, and greater family, that it will affect your identity. To have somebody close to you who has identified as different, it will affect your identity. So you will need to go on a journey, okay? Now, how to handle that practically is, you're allowed to have emotional reactions. But remember that emotional reactions are just emotional reactions. A few hours or a few days after the emotional reaction, you've got to go, okay, what are we actually going to do, right? We're still going to love the person. I'm still me. My family's still my family. We've just got a new journey that we've got to go on. Let's do it, okay? I don't know where this is going to take me. Some of this may hurt. Some of this may open up more love in me that I thought I never had, okay? I'm going to trust the doctors. I'm going to cling to my religious tradition. I'm going to talk with the family, and together we got to get through this.
That's a lot. Well, the reason I say that is because you can just imagine. I mean, we've seen in movies and we've seen it in the news and stuff. People are always worried about what the neighbors are going to say, what the family members, what the workers, the colleagues, the society is going to it's almost a stigma now. It's like, oh my God, you're the odd family, or
Yes.
what went wrong in that family. And also these people are going to start reacting to everything, or at least be sensitive to everybody. I mean, it is a big issue, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's not, yes, you mentioned love. I mean, that should always be available and supportive, in the family. But then some people may also react like, well, you're causing a problem for the family. If, let's say, they are, I don't know, maybe they
Yes.
have a very extreme belief, and now someone is literally just coming out of, nowhere and shocking the family, and they might even disown them, right? I mean, we've heard those
Yeah.
cases. I
Yes.
don't want anything to do with you. Get out of my sight, and so on and
Yes.
so forth, because they are not prepared to face everybody else, because now they have to almost express and defy the rules, and really have to justify what's going on. It is a
Yes.
tough place, so
It's
their
a very tough.
psychology is going to be very affected.
Yes, yes, it is. It is. And you mentioned about how we need to save face in front of other people. What will the neighbors think? Or what will the people at church think? Or what will people at the synagogue or mosque think? All right.
Yes.
And that becomes more difficult, right? However, I would argue, firstly, science is bigger than that. And I would argue that religion is bigger than that, right? This one issue is not going to take down all of science. It's not going to take down all of religion. It's not going to take down this family, right? So in a way, you've got to say, okay, we've got a few things to reconcile here. And at the moment, they're not being reconciled, right? So let's say practically, people who have, let's say, a strong faith, and these sort of issues are a real affront to the faith. It's a real challenge, right? To speak to somebody higher up in the faith, an elder or a pastor or whoever is in charge, to say, how do we handle this? What are we supposed to do? All right. And then to talk with, let's say, a person's doctor, if it's a child, or to talk to the person themselves to say, how can we best handle this? And medical centers now have psychologists and counselors to help families in this situation. And they are much better versed in these issues than even what I am saying, because it is a pluralistic world, and nobody is saying that you need to give up your faith or to give up your belief in science, but we all are saying that let's work through this together to find a way forward, even though it is difficult, because it is difficult, Hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, I can just imagine it's hard. I mean, again, the debate is just beginning, and it's going to continue, and people are always going to have a challenge. People always look at someone different in a very difficult way, right? It's always and people are brutal. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bullying out there, and it's not an age thing. It's everybody. I mean, it can be a bully, right?
Yeah.
It is a tough thing. So, and people are not so much understanding because they see it from their end, from their perspective and what they know. And so whatever is different, we are afraid of different, we are afraid of the unknown. And that's usually a reaction to those things.
Yeah, so I'm just going to butt in there, Hurricane, because
please.
No, because what we're talking about is life-threatening. We all need to be accepted as part of humanity, okay?
Yes.
And so that's why the stakes are really high here. But an amazing thing that I have seen in my community, because Sydney has so many different faiths all together, all right, over the last 30 years in particular, is an opening up of faiths to look at these issues, to be supportive, because any faith that I have seen sees the divine or its concept of the divine as loving and helpful, right? So, in other words, God, however that is put forward as a concept, is bigger than this. It is when we start to make rules that we can't get out of ourselves, okay? And that's where it takes a lot more understanding. But if we see it as a process rather than a right and wrong, and we will work through this with all the issues, we can move forward in this. I have seen it.
Well, like everything else, I mean, this is not. I mean, there's a lot of differences and controversial issues that happened in the history, and people adjusted to them, and religious beliefs kind of supported it one way or the other. So there is that. I mean, you're right. I mean, and to your point, most of religions have some sort of a an acceptance level. But there are rules in some. For example, I
Yes,
mean,
right.
it is a fact in Islam, for example, and this has been criticized for many years, especially in Saudi and some other parts of where the Islam faith is practiced. With the jurisprudence, at the, I guess, the core, like
Yeah.
the beheading and things like that. For example, homosexuality, is forbidden in Islam, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think I don't want to make a decision on the other religions because I don't know much about them in depth. But
Yeah.
I think it's from what I know, it is also somehow in Judaism and on Christianity. It depends what denomination. But so it is there. But a lot of the, I guess, the modern clergy, they kind of accept it to a degree and adjust with it, and and also the I guess the governments of these
Yes.
countries have allowed some flexibility to a degree. So things
Yes.
have shifted, over, especially in the last couple of decades. Things have
Yes.
changed tremendously. Even Saudi has been a lot more moderate now than they ever
Yes.
been. So changes are happening, and for good or bad. I mean, we're not here to judge that. I mean, hopefully it's all for good.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, like I said, this is a sensitive situation, so people can have, two sides of this the spectrum here. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, there can be opposite sides of the opinion. Um,
Yeah.
so one thing, doctor, I wanted to ask is that are there, based on your research and your expertise, are there any specific trends in maybe a particular group, ethnicity, religion, country? I mean, is that something that is, for example, more in the Western, world, an advanced world, country versus a third, world country? Is there anything in the studies, or at least the research and the knowledge that we have now that determines these kind of factors, or where people have more of this, I want to identify as this, versus, like, would you see that in more conservative societies?
Okay. So are you talking about transgender identification?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, there's actually much more opportunity for that in more developed countries because it is very difficult to identify in that in a lot of countries where, as you say, some of the religious norms are much more constrictive. And see, in a way, this is why I quoted the World Health Organization, because what they look to do is to get this whole world working together while still being able to respect each person's difference. And you talked about how we're all making adjustments. And I think that's what's happening, that very slowly across the whole world, all these different cultures, all these different religions, all these different ways of doing society are making little adjustments. And as you say, we hope that these adjustments are for the good. And from my point of view as a psychiatrist, they are, because we now live in societies where we do need to adjust to be with everybody else so that there is room for absolutely everybody. And to be able to do that without hiding what you actually feel, because that's the other thing, and that's very difficult. Because, in a family, you're able to say things a lot more open than you are, let's say, at school or a university or a public place. And that's always going to be that way because our sense of identity is strongest in our families, because that's where we can be who we actually are.
Thank you, Doc. So a couple more. We're few minutes. We still have a few minutes. One of the things that I think we've kind of alluded to in the last show was, now that we have a lot more discussion about this topic,
Yes.
the one attached discussion is public access. For example, bathrooms, toilets in the public. There's a big debate about that. Who goes where and how. So what is there any are you seeing, based on studies or articles or anything or research, that there is any challenge right now with that in terms of just the general I guess opinion? Because I mean, a lot of people may be not very comfortable to see somebody else that may have a different
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so this is very challenging because it is a challenge to something that's the core of our identity, how we identify in our gender and how we identify in our sexual expression goes to the core of who we are. In fact, so much so that 50 years ago, it was taken for granted what those expressions were for everybody. And you see, because our society has become much more pluralistic, we cannot take those things for granted. So to answer your point, Hurricane, when it comes down to what kind of toilets are there, I have to say that's not my area of expertise, because that's a public health measure. But the principles are still the same. We're being asked to adjust, to make room for more variance in society. And that's going to take a little bit of a challenge, but we can get through that together in the best way. And it takes time, and it takes dialogue, and it takes understanding and even acceptance of things that we don't know.
So keyword acceptance and at least understanding, what that means. And I guess that will be a lot more easier for people to accept those challenges. Because I didn't mean that it was for you to answer that, but really I was more referring to the reaction of people and how that will make them feel. I mean, if I don't subscribe, let's say, to that opinion, and now I am being subjected to it myself, or I'm being forced to actually accept it, that has an impact on me. So how do I deal with it?
That's right. Okay. So that is very difficult. That is very difficult. Okay. Because we are now in a society where certain ideals and even certain language are being forced on us. All right. And generally speaking, when you force people to do things, the outcome is not always good. All right. So what's behind all of this was the idea of liberation, that people who were previously oppressed need a bit of space. Right. So what I would say to that is it takes time and being genuine. So if there are people in your life that are different to you, you can actually build a friendship link to understand that particular person. Then all of a sudden it becomes easier. And the bizarre thing about this, Hurricane, is we actually have science dating back more than 40 years to say, and this is called the science of the mere exposure effect, that if you are exposed to people who are different to you, that you will begin to accept them. It is natural for us all to grow friendly towards each other. And because I work in mental health, where people have been stigmatized for having schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or whatever it happens to be, I know that being around people who are different, and they know being around people who are different, that we all actually become more accepting. So rather than forcing it, I would actually encourage people just to let it take time and get to know other people, because our tendency, believe it or not, according to the science, is to like each other.
That's beautiful. And we want that. We want people to love each other and like to. But you mentioned something very important, because we do know this. I mean, just by default, any metropolitan area, it's multi, ethnic. People get to have tolerance and more acceptance, as opposed to areas where there is one, particular group, as a majority. So it kind of makes a difference. You can see that even in just larger city versus small city. When you have a little bit of a melting pot versus another place. And to your point, I mean, obviously that is, and you're right. Over time, I mean, now there was a time, homosexuality was very taboo, and you can even mention it and see it, and then now, I mean, shows, TV, everything is becoming very just it's coming. So people are more accepting the concept today that they were 20 years, 30 years ago. So a lot of that stuff is changing. So assuming that's the trend over decades from now, I mean, this becomes not even non-issue. So, but you mentioned something powerful earlier about a couple of times about life-threatening. Now, if someone feels unsafe, whether they're the ones who actually are identifying one way or the other, or someone that is not, or maybe against the idea. So how what can they? Is there a support system? Are there any things that they can do to just kind of support themselves?
Okay, so firstly, I'm hoping that every city in every country has its helpline. In Australia, we have a helpline called Lifeline, where anybody can ring up and they will find a way to keep you safe and point you in the right direction to get help. And wherever you are in the world, please know what your helpline is, because it does come down to matters of life and death. And so the more understanding somebody has, and the more that they can be with people who not only understand but are able to treat and work on a certain pathway. And this is where mental health does come in. This is where psychiatry does have a role. We are here not only to keep people safe, but actually to keep people content in the long run. That's actually our aim. What they could do for themselves is talk to somebody, talk to a friend, or talk on the telephone, or talk to a professional. But get that help. Keeping things to yourself is not the best idea. Moving forward by talking to people is the way forward. Because everybody's part of it, Hurricane. We are all part of the human race.
Yes, sir, and thank you for that. The hour is gone, and as always, you delivered an excellent, excellent insights and information that got us closer to some of the questions. I mean, obviously, we can't summarize all the and all the issues here and respond to everything in 1 hour, but certainly this is closer. I know you mentioned love earlier, so I know we're gonna have your new book coming up in the end of the year, and we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna have a whole section about love. So that's important. Any last words before we close today's show?
Okay, just a few last words. Love, identity, respect, and trust. When we don't understand things, and I'm a medical practitioner, and this is not my area of expertise, I have to trust the experts in that area. And fortunately, Hurricane, mostly they get it right, and they're trying to get it right all the time. And I know that there's a bit of argy-bargy there as to how we actually get there, but the aim is to get it right for all of people to feel part of our society. So we'll keep working on that.
All right. Well, Doctor, thank you so much. I know it's morning for you, and you got to get about your things, and we're just about to wind down here. Yep. So listen, as always, it is a pleasure and honor, and great insights, great information. So as always, thank you. We'll be, I guess, talking on the next show, hopefully next month.
Yeah.
And there you go. That's about it.
We'll see you next month, Hurricane.
Thank you. And folks, thank you for being with us. Hope that this answered some of the questions that you might have and some of the questions that you've sent us. So hopefully, at least it gets you closer to where you need to be. And stay tuned for more insights and good advice from our dear friend, Dr. Heim. Bye for now.
Thank you, Hurricane. Bye-bye.